My name is Diana. I'm 34 years old and work as a kindergarten teacher in Boston. Nothing could have prepared me for standing at my dad's funeral, watching my brother Connor grinning while talking to our family lawyer. The confusion on my face turned to shock as I realized what was happening. Connor was claiming the entire inheritance. The worst part? Finding out I was apparently just my mom's child from a previous marriage. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if family betrayal and unexpected redemption stories resonate with you, please hit that subscribe button. Growing up, I never questioned that Walter Carson was my father. My earliest memories are filled with his deep laugh and the smell of his aftershave when he hugged me goodnight. I can still picture him teaching me to ride my first bike without training wheels. I was terrified of falling, but Dad ran alongside me the whole time, his hand hovering near the seat just in case. "You're doing it, Diana. Look at you go," he shouted, as I finally pedaled on my own, his voice brimming with pride. Our fishing trips were sacred. Dad would wake me before dawn, packing thermoses of hot chocolate and peanut butter sandwiches cut into triangles, just the way I liked them. We'd sit for hours by the lake behind our house, sometimes catching nothing but still counting those mornings as perfect. He taught me patience during those quiet moments, how to appreciate stillness in a chaotic world. Mom and Dad seemed like the perfect couple. Jennifer, my mother, looked at Walter with such adoration it made my young heart believe in fairy tales. They slow danced in the kitchen while making dinner, whispered inside jokes that made them burst into laughter, and held hands during movie nights on the couch. Their love seemed unbreakable, a foundation I built my understanding of relationships upon. Everything changed when I was 7, and Connor was born. The day my parents brought him home from the hospital, Dad placed him gently in my arms and said, "You're a big sister now, Diana. This is an important job." I took that responsibility seriously, even when Connor grew into a difficult toddler who seemed to resent my very existence. From the beginning, Connor showed signs of being incredibly possessive over our father. He would scream if Dad played with me instead of him, knock down the block towers we built together, and tear pages from books Dad read to me. My parents called it normal sibling rivalry, but it felt targeted, deliberate. Connor didn't want to share Dad's attention with anyone, especially me. Dad tried his best to treat us equally. When Connor broke my science fair project the night before presentation, Dad stayed up until 3 in the morning helping me rebuild it. When I won first place, he took us both out for ice cream, making sure Connor felt included in the celebration. This pattern continued throughout our childhood. Connor would act out, Dad would implement consequences, but then bend over backward to make sure Connor didn't feel left out when I succeeded. As teenagers, the dynamics worsened. Connor became increasingly controlling of our father's time and attention. If Dad planned to attend my choir concert, Connor would suddenly develop a stomachache or create a crisis that required Dad's immediate attention. Dad started missing my events more often, always with apologies and promises to make it up to me. Mom was my anchor during those years. "Your brother struggles with insecurity," she would explain while brushing my hair before bed. "Some people need more reassurance than others. It doesn't mean your father loves you any less." She encouraged me to be patient with Connor, to understand that his behavior came from a place of fear rather than hatred. I tried to follow her advice, though it became increasingly difficult as we grew older. When I was 19, our world shattered. Mom was diagnosed with aggressive cancer, and within 6 months, she was gone. The loss devastated all of us, but Dad seemed to physically shrink with grief. He stopped eating properly, forgot to pay bills, and spent hours staring at photos of Mom. While Connor continued his college education across the country, I put my own studies on hold to move back home and help Dad function. For nearly a year, I cooked his meals, managed the household finances, and gently encouraged him to join a grief support group. Slowly, he started to resemble himself again. We developed a new routine of Sunday brunches and phone calls throughout the week. When he finally told me, "I think I'm okay now, sweetheart. You should go back to school," I knew he meant it. I returned to college, eventually becoming a kindergarten teacher, just as I'd always planned. Even living in different cities, Dad and I remained close. We spoke several times a week, and I visited at least once a month. Connor, meanwhile, finished business school and took a job on the West Coast, rarely coming home even for holidays. Dad never complained about Connor's absence, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes when Christmas or his birthday passed without even a phone call from his son. 3 years ago, Dad's health began to decline. What started as just a cold progressed to pneumonia, then revealed underlying heart problems. With each hospital stay, I took time off work to be at his bedside. I advocated with doctors, researched treatment options, and made sure his medications were properly managed. Connor called occasionally during these crises, but always had reasons why he couldn't visit. Then something changed. After Dad received his terminal diagnosis, Connor suddenly became the attentive son. He took a leave of absence from work and moved back to our hometown. He insisted on taking Dad to appointments, managing his medications, and making decisions about his care. When I tried to stay involved, Connor created reasons why I shouldn't be present, telling me Dad was too tired for visitors or scheduling appointments without informing me until afterward. Dad seemed confused by the sudden attention, but grateful to have his son showing interest after years of distance. I stepped back, telling myself that Connor was finally stepping up, that Dad deserved to spend his remaining time with both his children. In those final months, I saw Dad less and less, as Connor became the gatekeeper to his time and attention. The few times I managed to visit alone, Dad seemed heavily medicated, drifting in and out of lucidity. I never suspected what Connor was planning. I was simply grateful that my brother had finally decided to be there for our father at the end. I couldn't have been more wrong. The day of Dad's funeral arrived with appropriately somber weather, gray skies, and a light drizzle that seemed to mirror the heaviness in my heart. The funeral home was filled with arrangements of white lilies and blue hydrangeas, the Dad's favorite flowers from the garden he had tended so carefully before his illness. Photos of his life decorated the room. Dad in his Navy uniform during his service years, Dad and Mom on their wedding day, Dad holding baby Connor, Dad teaching me to fish. A lifetime of memories compressed into framed moments. I arrived early to greet people, surprised by how many showed up. Dad's colleagues from his 30 years at the engineering firm, neighbors who remembered his legendary 4th of July barbecues, friends from his bowling league, all came to pay their respects. Each person shared stories about my father's kindness, his terrible jokes, his dependability. "Your father helped me fix my roof after that terrible storm," our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez told me, patting my hand. "Wouldn't take a dime for it either. Just said that's what neighbors do." Connor arrived fashionably late, dressed in an expensive black suit that looked freshly purchased. Throughout the service, while I struggled to maintain my composure, Connor checked his phone repeatedly. During the eulogy delivered by Dad's best friend Thomas, I noticed Connor actually smirk at something on his screen. His behavior felt jarringly out of place, but I chalked it up to people grieving differently. After the minister finished the final prayer, Connor suddenly appeared at my side, with a man I didn't recognize. "Diana, this is Gregory Walsh, Dad's lawyer," Connor said, his tone oddly triumphant. The man extended his hand, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry for your loss," Gregory said mechanically. "We'll need to meet at my office in an hour to discuss the estate." I was taken aback. I thought Dad used Barbara Wilson for his legal affairs. She's been his attorney for decades. Connor waved his hand dismissively. Dad switched to Gregory last year. Barbara retired. Before I could ask more questions, Connor was guiding the lawyer away, their heads bent together in hushed conversation. The meeting at the lawyer's office felt surreal. The conference room was coldly corporate with its gleaming table and leather chairs, nothing like the warm, cluttered office of Barbara Wilson, where Dad had taken me when I was 18 to witness the signing of his will. Connor sat across from me, legs crossed casually, while I clutched a tissue, still reeling from burying my father hours earlier. Gregory cleared his throat and began reviewing documents. As the executor of Walter Carson's estate, I'm required to inform all interested parties of the distribution of assets. He shuffled some papers. The deceased's final will, dated 3 months ago, leaves the entirety of his estate, including the family home, investment accounts, and personal property to his son, Connor Carson. The words didn't register immediately. I'm sorry. What? I looked from the lawyer to my brother. There must be some mistake. Dad always said he was leaving the house to both of us and splitting everything else equally. Connor's face twisted into something between a smile and a sneer. There's no mistake, Diana. Dad finally accepted the truth before he died. What truth? My voice sounded small, even to my own ears, that you're not his biological daughter. Connor delivered this bombshell with casual cruelty, as though commenting on the weather. Mom was previously married to some guy named Richard Thompson. You're his kid, not Dad's. Dad only raised you out of obligation to Mom. The room seemed to tilt sideways. That's not possible. Dad never mentioned. He didn't want to hurt your feelings, Connor interrupted. But when he got sick, he decided to put things right. The inheritance belongs to his real child, me. My hands trembled as I turned to the lawyer. May I see documentation of these changes? And proof of Dad's capacity when he made them? Gregory slid papers across the table. The will was indeed dated just 3 weeks before Dad's death, during the period when Connor had been controlling his medications and limiting my visits. The signature looked shaky, nothing like Dad's usual precise handwriting. Was there a medical evaluation done to ensure my father was competent when he signed this? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Carson assured me his father was lucid that day. Mr. Carson? You mean Connor? I looked between them. Connor brought Dad to sign this? Connor's patience visibly thinned. Stop making this difficult, Diana. You should be grateful Dad provided for you as long as he did, considering you weren't his responsibility. The dismissive way he referred to our father, as though Walter had been nothing more than a financial provider, rather than the man who had raised me for 34 years, was more painful than the inheritance issue. Did Dad tell you this himself? I asked quietly. That I wasn't his biological daughter? Connor rolled his eyes. Of course he did. Why else would he change his will? But something in his expression flickered. A moment of calculation that made me suddenly suspect Connor had orchestrated this entire situation. Had he discovered information about my birth and used it to manipulate our dying father? Or worse, had he fabricated the entire story? I could have fought it, could have hired my own lawyer, contested the will, demanded a proper investigation into Dad's mental state when he signed. But looking at Connor's smug face, I realized something important. No inheritance was worth remaining tethered to someone capable of such calculated cruelty. Fine, I said, standing up. You can have it all. The house, the money, everything. But don't ever contact me again. Connor actually laughed, the sound echoing harshly in the sterile room. As if I would, he replied, already turning his attention to the papers detailing his newfound wealth. I walked out of the office without looking back, then sat in my car for nearly an hour, staring at the building that housed what remained of my father's legacy. Finally, I drove to what had always been home, the 2-story colonial where I'd grown up. I used my key one last time, not to take anything, but to say goodbye to the walls that had witnessed my childhood. I walked through empty rooms, already being emptied of furniture Connor was planning to sell, whispering my own private farewell to the father I had loved and the life I had believed was mine. By sunset, I was driving back to my apartment in Boston, leaving behind not just material inheritance, but the very foundation of my identity. I don't remember much about the drive back to Boston. The world had narrowed to the white lines on the highway and the hollow feeling in my chest. When I finally reached my apartment, I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching familiar objects that suddenly seemed to belong to someone else. Who was I, if not Walter Carson's daughter. The breakdown came suddenly. I was making tea, a simple, automatic task, when the mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the kitchen floor. Something inside me broke along with it. I sank down amid the ceramic shards, and hot liquid, sobs tearing through me with such force I couldn't breathe. I called Samantha, my best friend since college, barely coherent through my tears. "Don't move," she ordered, after I managed to explain what happened. "I'm coming over." 30 minutes later, Samantha arrived with an overnight bag, a bottle of wine, and enough Chinese takeout to feed several people. She cleaned up the broken mug, while I sat wrapped in a blanket on the couch, then poured us both generous glasses of Cabernet. "Start from the beginning," she said, handing me a tissue box. I told her everything: Connor's behavior at the funeral, the meeting with the strange lawyer, the bombshell about my parentage, and my decision to walk away from the inheritance. Samantha listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to outrage. "That manipulative little weasel," she muttered when I finished. "Diana, you need to fight this. Connor clearly took advantage of your father when he was vulnerable." "What's the point?" I asked, exhaustion settling into my bones. "Even if I get some money or property back, I've still lost the most important thing, my understanding of who I am. If I'm not Walter Carson's daughter, then who am I?" Samantha took my hands in hers. "You're the same person you've always been. Biology doesn't dictate who loved you or who you love." Her words made sense intellectually, but emotionally, I was adrift. That night, after Samantha fell asleep on the pull-out couch, I dug through my closet for the photo albums I'd brought from my childhood home years earlier. I spread them across my bedroom floor, studying images of the man I'd called Dad, searching for clues I might have missed. There he was teaching me to swim at Lake Michigan, his hands supporting my back while I floated. There he was at my high school graduation, face beaming with pride. There he was helping me move into my first apartment, installing shelves and checking the locks 3 times before he felt comfortable leaving me. His love seemed so genuine in these frozen moments. Had it all been obligation, rather than affection? The next morning, I called the school where I taught and requested a leave of absence. My principal was understanding. I'd accumulated weeks of unused personal time, and with the school year nearly over, a substitute could handle my kindergarten class until summer break. With that handled, I found myself with something I'd never expected: empty time to face the wreckage of my identity. I started therapy the following week. Dr. Mason specialized in grief and trauma, and during our first session, she explained that I was experiencing ambiguous loss, grieving both my father's death and the loss of my understanding of my place in the world. "You're mourning multiple things simultaneously," she explained. "Your father, your sense of identity, your relationship with your brother, and your trust in your family narrative. That's an overwhelming burden." During our sessions, I began unpacking memories, examining them from this new perspective. I remembered how Connor would sometimes say hurtful things during childhood arguments. "You're not really part of this family," or "Dad loves me more because I'm his real kid," comments I'd dismissed as typical. Sibling cruelty. Had he somehow known the truth even then? Or had those been coincidental barbs that took on new meaning in retrospect? 3 weeks after the funeral, while organizing my home office, I discovered a box of my mother's belongings I'd never fully explored after her death. It had been too painful at the time, and later I'd simply forgotten about it. Now, I carefully removed the lid, catching the faint scent of her perfume still clinging to the contents. Inside were documents I'd never seen before, including my original birth certificate. My breath caught as I read the father's name, Richard Thompson, so Connor hadn't been lying about that part. There were also photos of my mother with a man I didn't recognize, a tall, slender man with curly hair similar to my own, his arm around my pregnant mother's waist. They looked happy, young, and in love. Beneath these was a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. With trembling hands, I untied the bundle and began reading. They were exchanges between my mother and Walter, dating from before their marriage. In one, Walter wrote, "Jennifer, I want you to know that I already consider Diana my daughter in every way that matters. The fact that another man contributed to her DNA means nothing compared to the joy I feel watching her grow. I look forward to legally adopting her and being the father she deserves." Another letter contained details about the adoption process. Walter had legally adopted me when I was 3 years old, something neither he nor my mother had ever told me. There were court documents confirming the adoption, photos of the three of us outside the courthouse, Walter holding me on his hip while my mother smiled beside them. Most revealing was a letter my mother had written but apparently never sent, dated shortly after their wedding. "My dearest Walter, today Diana called you Daddy for the first time, without any prompting from me. I watched your eyes fill with tears, and I knew with absolute certainty that bringing you into our lives was the best decision I've ever made. Richard may have given her life, but you are giving her a father's love, which is infinitely more valuable." I sat surrounded by these artifacts of a history I'd never known existed, crying tears that felt different from the ones I'd shed since the funeral. These weren't tears of loss, but of recognition. I had been chosen. Walter Carson had deliberately, consciously decided to be my father. This discovery shifted something fundamental in my grief. Yes, I wasn't biologically Walter's daughter, but he had wanted me. He had chosen to adopt me, to give me his name, to raise me as his own. That choice seemed more meaningful than any biological connection could have been. In my next therapy session, I brought some of the letters to show Dr. Mason. "It seems like your father made a conscious choice to be your parent," she observed. "That's a powerful testament to his character." "Then why would he change his will to exclude me?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me for weeks. Dr. Mason considered this carefully. "Based on what you've told me about your brother's behavior and your father's declining health, I think we need to consider the possibility that your father may not have fully understood what he was signing, or that he was under undue influence. As painful as it was to imagine Connor manipulating our dying father, this explanation made more sense than believing Dad had suddenly rejected me after 34 years. It also aligned with the suspicious timing of the will change and the switch to a new lawyer I'd never heard of. Throughout May and June, I continued therapy while slowly rebuilding my daily routines. I started taking morning walks in the park near my apartment, rediscovered my love for painting watercolors, and began reconnecting with friends I'd neglected during Dad's illness. The pain didn't disappear, but it became something I could carry without being crushed by its weight. By early July, I was preparing to return to teaching when an unexpected document arrived that would once again reshape everything I thought I knew. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. The return address showed a law firm I didn't recognize: Wilson, Goldstein, and Associates. I almost tossed it aside with the junk mail, assuming it was some sort of generic legal solicitation. Something made me pause, though. Perhaps the handwritten address rather than a printed label. I carefully opened the envelope to find a formal letter requesting my presence regarding important documents relating to the estate of Walter Carson. My first instinct was to throw it away. I'd finally reached a place of tentative peace with the situation. Did I really want to reopen those wounds? But curiosity won out over caution. I called the number on the letterhead and scheduled an appointment for the following day. The offices of Wilson, Goldstein, and Associates were located in a converted Victorian house in Cambridge, nothing like the sleek corporate environment of Gregory Walsh's firm. As I entered the wood-paneled reception area, an elderly woman approached me with a warm smile. "You must be Diana," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Barbara Wilson." The name struck a chord immediately. Barbara Wilson? My father's original attorney? She nodded, gesturing for me to follow her into a comfortable office filled with books and family photos. "I've been trying to locate you for several weeks. Your brother was less than helpful in providing your contact information." "I thought you had retired," I said, remembering Connor's dismissive explanation. Barbara's expression hardened slightly. That's what your brother told you? I did reduce my caseload last year, but I certainly didn't retire. I've been your father's attorney for over 30 years. She adjusted her glasses, studying me carefully. Diana, I have concerns about the circumstances surrounding the changes to your father's will. My heart began racing. What kind of concerns? Before I get into that, I have something for you. She unlocked a drawer in her desk and removed a sealed envelope with my name, written in my father's distinctive handwriting. Your father left this with me approximately 1 year ago, with instructions that I should deliver it to you personally in the event of his death. With trembling hands, I accepted the envelope. The paper felt heavy, expensive. Dad always appreciated quality stationery. I carefully broke the seal and unfolded several pages covered in my father's neat penmanship. My dearest Diana, the letter began. If you're reading this, then I am gone, and Barbara has fulfilled her promise to ensure this reaches you. I hope this letter finds you well, though I imagine you are still grieving, as I grieved when we lost your mother. There are things I need to explain that may be difficult to understand, but I ask that you read this with an open heart. Dad went on to describe how Connor's behavior had become increasingly concerning over the past few years. He wrote about noticing Connor's attempts to isolate him, particularly after his health began to decline. I fear that as my body weakens, Connor's control over my affairs will only grow stronger, he wrote. He has already suggested changing my long-standing legal and financial arrangements, often when I am too tired to properly consider the implications. The most shocking revelation came halfway through the letter. To protect your inheritance from Connor's manipulation, I have created a separate trust in your name that Connor knows nothing about. Half of my assets have been placed in this trust, with Barbara serving as trustee until such time as the funds transfer to you. The family home remains in my estate and will likely go to Connor, but the trust contains funds equal to half its value, along with investments and personal items I especially want you to have. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. Dad explained that he had become suspicious of Connor's intentions after discovering him searching through financial documents without permission. I confronted him, and his response convinced me that he would attempt to control my estate after my death, potentially at your expense. While I love both my children, I cannot ignore the patterns of behavior that suggest Connor would try to deny you your rightful inheritance. The final paragraphs of the letter struck directly at the heart of my recent identity crisis. Diana, I need you to know that being your father has been the greatest joy of my life. When I married your mother, you were barely walking, but from the moment I first held you, I knew you were my daughter, in every way that matters. The legal adoption we completed, when you were 3, was merely a formality. In my heart, you were mine from the beginning. Blood doesn't make a family. Love does. The bond we share transcends biology, and nothing, not legal documents, not Connor's jealousy, nothing in this world or beyond it, can change the fact that you are, and always will be, my beloved daughter. I suspect Connor may try to use the circumstances of your birth to turn you against me or to justify taking what should rightfully be shared between my children. Please don't let him succeed in this. Know that I have loved you completely, without reservation, from the first moment your mother introduced us. All my love, Dad. I set the letter down, overcome with emotion. Barbara gave me a moment to collect myself before continuing. Your father came to me very concerned about Connor's increasing control over his affairs, she explained. He was particularly worried that Connor might try to isolate him or influence him to change his will during periods when medication affected his judgment. That's exactly what happened, I whispered. Barbara nodded grimly. I suspected as much when I heard about the new will. Walter created this trust specifically to ensure you would be protected, regardless of what happened with his will. He remained completely lucid when we established the trust, and I have documentation from his physicians confirming his competency at that time. She proceeded to show me the trust documents. True to Dad's letter, the trust contained assets worth approximately half his estate, including investment accounts, his prized collection of first-edition books, Mom's jewelry, and family heirlooms he had wanted me to have. Walter was very specific about certain items, Barbara said, showing me the inventory. Your grandmother's pearl necklace, the antique desk from his study, the photo albums from before Connor was born. He wanted to ensure these pieces of family history remained with you. Most surprising was learning that Dad had maintained the trust even after creating the new will that left everything to Connor. Your father called me the day after signing that new will, Barbara revealed. He was distressed, saying Connor had taken him to another lawyer when he was heavily medicated. He asked if the trust was still protected, and I assured him it was completely separate from his will and couldn't be touched. The revelation that Dad had been aware of Connor's manipulation, but unable to fight it in his weakened state, was both heartbreaking and validating. He hadn't rejected me or forgotten our bond. He had been trying to protect me, even as his control over his own affairs slipped away. What happens now? I asked, still processing everything. The trust transfers to your control immediately, Barbara explained. I've prepared the necessary paperwork. Connor cannot contest it as it was established separately from the will, with proper legal documentation of your father's competency. As I signed the documents, making the transfer official, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. It wasn't about the money or possessions. It was knowing that Dad's final act had been one of love and protection toward me. He had found a way to communicate his truth, despite Connor's interference. There's one more thing, Barbara said, handing me a small box. Your father asked that I personally give you this. Inside was Dad's pocket watch, a family heirloom passed down through generations of Carson men. Attached was a small note in his handwriting. To carry with you always, so a piece of me remains close to your heart. I closed my hand around the watch, feeling its weight and warmth. This tangible connection to Dad and the generations before him felt like an anchor in the storm of uncertainty I'd been weathering. Biology might not make us Carsons, but love and legacy did. As I left Barbara's office, I knew Connor would soon discover what Dad had done. I suspected his reaction would be swift and furious. I was right. I had barely a week to process everything I'd learned before Connor showed up unannounced at my apartment. The building's security system buzzed, and when I checked the video intercom, I was shocked to see my brother standing in the lobby, looking impatient. My first instinct was to ignore him, but curiosity won out. What possible reason could he have for contacting me after everything that had happened? I buzzed him up, bracing myself for whatever storm he was bringing. When I opened the door, Connor stood there with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between anger and desperation, poorly masked by a fake smile. Diana, he said, his voice artificially warm. You look well. What do you want, Connor? I didn't invite him in, blocking the doorway with my body. Can't a brother check on his sister? He tried pushing past me, but I stood firm. His friendly facade cracked slightly. Fine. May I come in? This isn't a conversation for the hallway. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. Connor immediately began scanning my apartment, taking in the furnishings and decor as though cataloging possessions. Nice place, he commented, though his tone suggested the opposite. Teaching must pay better than I thought. Again, why are you here? I crossed my arms, maintaining distance between us. Connor's pretense of friendliness evaporated. You went behind my back, he accused, his voice hardening. Dad left everything to me. Everything. Then I find out you somehow convinced him to hide half of it in a secret trust. That's practically theft. So he'd discovered the trust. I wondered how. Perhaps he'd tried to access accounts only to find balances much lower than expected. I didn't convince Dad to do anything, I replied calmly. He created that trust on his own, specifically because he was concerned about your behavior. Connor's face flushed. That's a lie. Dad would never do that. Barbara Wilson has documentation proving otherwise. Dad was fully competent when he created the trust, unlike when you took him to sign that new will while he was heavily medicated. You think you're so clever, Connor snarled, dropping all pretense now. Well, I'm contesting the trust. I'll sue you, Barbara. Everyone involved. That money is mine. Go ahead, I said, surprised by my own calmness. Barbara prepared for that possibility. The trust will stand up to any legal challenge. Connor began pacing my living room, his movements becoming more agitated. You don't understand. I need that money. What happened to the half of the estate you already got? I asked. Connor's expression shifted from anger to something closer to panic. Investments went bad. I had some opportunities that didn't pan out. You mean you gambled it away? I translated, remembering Dad's frequent concerns about Connor's risky financial ventures. They weren't gambles, they were calculated risks, he snapped, and they would have paid off if I had the full amount to invest. Your trust is holding the capital I need to recoup my losses. The realization hit me. Connor had already blown through his inheritance in just 3 months. The house, the investments, everything Dad had worked his entire life to build, gone on Connor's calculated risks. That's not my problem, I said quietly. Dad divided the estate the way he wanted to. Connor switched tactics, his voice suddenly nostalgic. Remember when we were kids and Dad took us camping in the Adirondacks? That thunderstorm hit, and he told us stories all night to keep us from being scared? I stared at him, baffled by this sudden change of topic. What does that have to do with anything? We're family, Diana. Despite everything, we're the only family each other has left. Dad would want us to stick together. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost laughable. Connor had never cared about our family bond before. Not when he was trying to cut me out of Dad's life during his final months. Not when he was claiming I wasn't really a Carson. Not when he told me he never wanted to see me again. Dad never loved us anyway, Connor continued when I didn't respond. Not really. He was just going through the motions after Mom died. The casual cruelty of this statement struck me like a physical blow. That's not true. Dad loved us both, even when you made it difficult. Even when you pushed him away for years, then only showed interest when he was dying. You don't know what you're talking about, Connor hissed. You weren't even his real daughter. There it was, the weapon he thought would wound me most deeply. But after reading Dad's letter, after understanding the deliberate choice Walter Carson had made to be my father, these words had lost their power. Biology doesn't make a family, Connor. Dad chose to be my father. He adopted me legally when I was 3. He wanted me as his daughter. I reached into my pocket, touching the familiar shape of Dad's pocket watch. Nothing you say can change that. Connor's expression darkened. I need that money, Diana. I'm in trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind where people expect to be paid back, he said vaguely. Important people. If you transfer the trust to me, I can fix everything. No, I said simply. I'm your brother, he exploded, desperation clear in his voice now. You're supposed to help me. You gave up the right to call yourself my brother when you tried to erase me from Dad's life, when you manipulated him into changing his will, when you mocked our relationship at his funeral. Each word was measured, calm. You made your choices, Connor. Now you have to live with them. His face contorted with rage. If you don't help me, I'll tell everyone about your real father, about how Mom was already pregnant when she met Dad, about all the family secrets. Go ahead, I shrugged. I'm not ashamed of my history. Dad adopted me because he loved me. That's a beautiful story, not a shameful secret. Connor's threats escalated, becoming increasingly desperate. Dad told me he regretted adopting you, said it was the biggest mistake of his life. The lie was so transparent, so contrary to everything I now knew to be true, that it actually made me smile. We both know that's not true. Get out of my apartment, Connor. Not until you agree to sign over the trust, he insisted, taking a step toward me. I'm not asking. I moved to the door, opening it wide. Leave now, or I'll call security. Connor didn't move. You're making a huge mistake. I pressed the security button beside my door. No, you made the mistake. Several of them, actually. When he still refused to leave, The building's security guard appeared in the hallway. "Everything okay, Miss Carson?" "My brother was just leaving," I said firmly. Connor glared at me as he walked out, stopping in the doorway to deliver one final threat. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." But as I closed and locked the door behind him, I knew it was over, at least for me. I immediately changed my phone number, email address, and social media accounts. I wanted nothing more to do with Connor's chaos and manipulation. Whatever financial hole he'd dug himself into, he would have to find his way out without using me as a ladder. That night, I slept better than I had since Dad's funeral, the pocket watch resting on my nightstand, ticking steadily like a heartbeat. When the new school year began in September, I returned to my kindergarten classroom with a renewed sense of purpose. The summer had given me time to process everything that had happened, to integrate my new understanding of my family history into my sense of self. Standing before 20 eager 5-year-olds on the first day, I felt more grounded than I had in months. "Good morning, friends," I greeted them, their excitement mirroring my own. "I'm Miss Carson, and we're going to have an amazing year together." The name Carson felt right on my tongue, a conscious choice rather than an accident of birth. Walter Carson had chosen me as his daughter, and I was choosing to honor that bond by keeping his name. My first project with the trust funds was establishing a scholarship at Dad's alma mater, Boston University. The Walter Carson Engineering Scholarship would be awarded annually to students who demonstrated not just academic promise, but also the qualities Dad had embodied: integrity, compassion, and dedication to helping others. Creating something lasting in his name helped transform my grief into something constructive. Therapy continued to be an essential part of my healing journey. During one breakthrough session in October, Dr. Mason asked me to articulate what I had learned from the entire experience. "I've realized that my worth isn't determined by biology," I said after considering the question. "For 34 years, I was Walter Carson's daughter in every way that mattered. Finding out we didn't share DNA doesn't erase those 3 decades of love and connection." "That's a powerful realization," Dr. Mason acknowledged. "Many people struggle their entire lives with defining themselves through external validation. I've also learned that family is a choice," I continued. "Dad chose to be my father. I'm choosing which relationships deserve space in my life going forward." One unexpected outcome of my journey was reconnecting with my mother's side of the family. After reading Dad's letter, I reached out to my maternal Aunt Patricia, who lived in Chicago. We'd lost touch after Mom's death, partly due to distance, and partly because the connection had been painful for both of us. "Diana, I've thought about you so often," Patricia said during our first phone call. "Jennifer would be so proud of the woman you've become." During a visit to Chicago in November, Patricia shared stories about my mother's first marriage to Richard Thompson. "They were college sweethearts," she explained, as we looked through old photos. "Richard was brilliant, studying physics. They married young, and you were conceived during their final year of school." "What happened to him?" I asked, studying a photo of the man whose genes I carried. Patricia's expression saddened. "A car accident when your mother was 7 months pregnant with you. It was devastating. Jennifer moved back home with our parents to have you, and that's where she met Walter about a year later." Learning about Richard Thompson gave me a new dimension to my identity. I had another father, one who had never had the chance to know me. Patricia put me in touch with Richard's sister, my biological aunt Elizabeth, who lived in Seattle. Our first video call was emotional for both of us. "You have his eyes," Elizabeth said, tears welling up, "and his curly hair. Richard would have been an amazing father if he'd had the chance." Elizabeth shared photos and stories about my biological father, his love of classical music, his talent for mathematics, his terrible jokes. I discovered traits I'd inherited from him: my natural aptitude for numbers, my habit of humming when concentrating, even my aversion to cilantro. "Richard was so excited about becoming a father," Elizabeth told me. "He had already painted the nursery and built a crib before the accident." Rather than feeling conflicted about these new connections, I found them enriching. I could honor Richard Thompson's memory while still cherishing Walter Carson as the father who raised me. I wasn't choosing between them. I was acknowledging that both men had contributed to my existence in different but equally valuable ways. Through Elizabeth, I also learned something that helped explain a puzzling aspect of my childhood. Apparently, when I was about 3 years old, a distant cousin of Richard's had tried to claim custody of me, arguing that I should be raised by blood relatives. Walter had fought fiercely for the right to adopt me legally, ensuring that no one could ever take me from the family he and my mother had created. "Your mother told me Walter was absolutely adamant," Elizabeth recalled. "He said he'd spend every penny he had on legal fees before he'd let anyone take his daughter away." This revelation made Connor's attempts to use my adoption against me seem even more misguided. Far from being a reluctant stepfather, Walter had actively fought to secure his legal relationship with me. As winter approached, I found myself drawn to make other significant changes in my life. I moved from my apartment to a cozy townhouse closer to my school, using part of the trust to create a fresh start in a space untainted by Connor's visit. I enrolled in a master's program in early childhood education, fulfilling a professional goal I'd put on hold during Dad's illness. I also began dating again, after years of focusing exclusively on my career and family responsibilities. I met Michael at a fundraiser for my school's art program, a single father raising his daughter Lucy after his wife's death 3 years earlier. Our shared experiences of loss and rebuilding created an immediate connection. "It's not easy raising a child alone," Michael confided during our third date, watching his 8-year-old daughter at soccer practice. "But it's also the most rewarding thing I've ever done." Watching Michael with Lucy showed me what healthy family love looked like: patient, consistent, unconditional. It reminded me of how Dad had been with me throughout my childhood, choosing every day to be the father I needed. By spring, I had used part of the trust to establish a small nonprofit organization supporting blended families. The Chosen Family Foundation provided resources, counseling, and community for families created through adoption, remarriage, and other non-traditional paths. At our first community event, I shared my own story publicly for the first time. "Family isn't defined by DNA," I told the gathered parents and children. "It's defined by love, by choice, by showing up day after day." The man who raised me chose to be my father, and that choice was more meaningful than any biological connection could have been. The foundation quickly became a passion project, filling evenings and weekends with purpose. We created support groups, educational resources for schools, and an annual scholarship for adopted children pursuing higher education. Through this work, I found meaning in my own complicated family history, transforming pain into something that could help others. As summer approached again, I reflected on how much had changed in a single year. I had lost a father, but gained a deeper understanding of his love. I had discovered my biological father's identity and connected with family I never knew existed. I had set boundaries with Connor that protected my well-being. I had created new purpose through my foundation and found new love with Michael and Lucy. Most importantly, I had come to understand that I was the product of 2 fathers who had loved me in different ways. One who had given me life, but never had the chance to know me, and one who had chosen to raise me as his own, giving me his name, his values, and his unconditional love. Rather than diminishing my sense of identity, this knowledge had expanded it, creating space for multiple truths to coexist. I was Diana Carson, daughter of Walter Carson by choice and love. I was also Diana Thompson, daughter of Richard Thompson by biology and heritage. Both identities were valid, both were valuable, and neither could be erased by Connor's attempts to rewrite our family history. 1 year after Dad's funeral, I finally felt ready to visit his grave. I hadn't been back since the day we buried him, the pain of Connor's betrayal having tainted even this final connection. But on a clear June morning, I drove to the cemetery with a bouquet of blue hydrangeas freshly cut from my own garden. 2 started with cuttings from Dad's beloved plants I'd rescued, before Connor sold the family home. The cemetery was peaceful, birds singing in the old oak trees that provided dappled shade over the rows of headstones. I found Dad's grave easily, the granite marker still looking new compared to those surrounding it. Walter James Carson, it read. Beloved husband and father. I placed the flowers at the base of the headstone and sat on the small bench nearby. Hi, Dad, I said softly, feeling only slightly self-conscious about speaking aloud. Sorry it took me so long to come back. For nearly an hour, I sat there talking to him, telling him about the scholarship in his name, my new house, the foundation, Michael and Lucy. I told him about connecting with Richard's family and how I'd come to appreciate having two fathers who had contributed to my life in different but equally valuable ways. I understand why you never told me about the adoption, I said. You probably thought it didn't matter, because in all the ways that counted, I was your daughter. And you were right. It doesn't change anything important. As a gentle breeze rustled the hydrangea petals, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The anger I'd carried about Connor's manipulation had finally dissipated, replaced by something closer to pity. Connor had inherited money and property, but had missed the true value of Dad's legacy, his integrity, his capacity for love, his understanding that family transcends biology. The week after my cemetery visit, Barbara Wilson called with news. Connor formally contested the trust, she informed me. As expected, the court ruled against him. The judge was particularly unimpressed, with evidence that Connor had isolated your father during his final months and facilitated the will change while your father was heavily medicated. How did Connor take it? I asked, not out of concern but curiosity. Not well, Barbara admitted. He's apparently been telling extended family members that you manipulated your father and stole his inheritance. I wasn't surprised. Let him talk. People who knew Dad will understand the truth. I had learned not to waste energy defending myself against Connor's narratives. Those who mattered knew what kind of person I was, just as they had known what kind of man Dad was. Connor's attempts to rewrite history couldn't change reality. In the months that followed, I occasionally heard updates about Connor through mutual acquaintances. He'd been forced to sell the family home to cover debts. He'd moved several times, each residence smaller than the last. He'd cycled through jobs, unable to maintain the professional relationships necessary for success. Part of me felt sad for him, recognizing that his issues stemmed from deep insecurity and fear. Your brother seems to believe that his value as a person is tied to material wealth and status, Dr. Mason observed during one of our now monthly sessions. That's a painful way to live. It is, I agreed. I wish he could understand that Dad would have loved him regardless of his achievements or failures. That's what real parental love looks like. My own life continued to evolve in positive directions. My relationship with Michael deepened, our shared experiences of loss, creating a foundation of empathy and understanding. His daughter Lucy and I bonded over art projects and baking experiments. We created new family traditions while honoring memories of both my fathers, celebrating Richard's birthday by donating to physics scholarships, marking Dad's favorite holidays with his traditional recipes. The Chosen Family Foundation expanded its programs, eventually partnering with several adoption agencies to provide resources for families navigating the complex emotional terrain of creating families through choice rather than biology. I found purpose in helping others understand that family bonds aren't defined by DNA, but by daily acts of love and commitment. Perhaps the most profound lesson I learned through losing and rediscovering my inheritance was the value of boundaries. Walking away from Connor had been the healthiest choice I could make, freeing me from the toxic dynamics that had characterized our relationship for decades. I discovered that sometimes the people we need to distance ourselves from are those we're told should be closest to us, and that's okay. I also learned that losing can sometimes be gaining. For a brief period, I thought I'd lost everything: my father, my inheritance, even my identity as Walter Carson's daughter. Yet, through that loss, I gained a deeper understanding of Dad's love, connections to biological family I never knew existed, and ultimately, a stronger sense of self, defined by my own values rather than external validation. As I look back on this journey a year later, I realize that the most valuable inheritance Dad left me wasn't in his will, or even in the trust he created. It was the example he set by choosing to be my father every day for 34 years, by demonstrating that love is an active choice we make and remake constantly. That lesson has shaped how I teach my kindergartners, how I run the foundation, how I'm building a relationship with Michael and Lucy, with the understanding that family is created through consistent care and commitment, not through chance or obligation. So what about you? How do you define family in your own life? Is it about blood connections, shared history, or the people who choose to stand beside you through life's challenges? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to hear more reflections on family, identity, and finding strength through life's unexpected turns. Thank you for sharing this journey with me, and remember that sometimes what looks like an ending is actually the beginning of something beautiful. Don't forget to like and share this video if you found value in my story. Your support means everything as we build this community together.